Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's Thursday with AARP Wisconsin. I am Amber Miller, your host, but also the Associate State Director with AARP Wisconsin. Before we get started on our show today, which is all about the AARP Community Challenge Grant, just want to also make sure that you know to visit the AARP Wisconsin website for all upcoming virtual events and information that might be of interest to you. And you can check that out at the below email or web address. Also, if you are interested in volunteering with us, we would love for you to join our volunteer family. You could look below and visit that website, which gives you additional information about volunteering with us, including registering for our local office to contact you about opportunities. Also, please remember there is a vaccine website through AARP Wisconsin, which is dedicated just to the vaccine relief here in the state of Wisconsin. It is updated very often, so we definitely encourage you to visit that website. And of course, last but not least is the AARP Friendly Voice Initiative, which launched last year. This is an opportunity for you to receive a friendly voice phone call from one of our trained AARP volunteers. This is no cost. You could be any age, and you do not need to be a member of AARP Wisconsin to receive this. You can go to the website below or the phone number 1-888 281 0145 to put a request in. You could do this for yourself, or if you are a family member, you can do that on behalf of somebody. Please note that we will be taking questions live throughout this broadcast. We'd love to hear from you. So before we get to our first guest, we're going to play a short video about the grant program. And as I stated before, this show is about the 2021 Community Challenge Grant, which launched last month. So we're going to hear from two of our great guests, including one who is a past grantee from 2019, which is the Village of Greendale. So please hold on, and we will be with you shortly with this short video.
This project hopefully will bring people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities downtown to enjoy the space.
We're a city that wants to go from the 8-year-old in a playground having a good time to the 80-year-old making sure they can get across the sidewalk.
All ages and all abilities can benefit from this kind of technology.
The AARP Community Challenge Grant is a grant program to make communities more livable for people of all ages with tangible improvements that jumpstart long-term change.
If we don't have a very focused aim of making communities more livable, then it says something about us. It says that we're not sincere about building cities that people have a better quality of life. And so we're excited about all that AARP has done for us in aiding us to accomplish that goal.
We do this because AARP is invested in livable communities for all people as they age. We want to make communities strong.
What's important to note about this park is that it is an intergenerational park, and it was designed specifically to meet the needs of people of all ages. Parks are such a critical part of city fabric.
Giving them that choice, that freedom of mobility choice, doing it even with small things like upgrading these intersections, it makes a huge difference.
Hay muchas necesidades por parte de los residentes y una gran necesidad era esta, tener un espacio en donde ellos poder esperar su bus o su transporte. Eso les ha hecho a ellos muy felices.
Benches are also a place to build community, so now you've kind of built a little tiny public space where people can sit down and rest and talk. It's a small piece of a livable community, of a community that's great for all ages.
This effort promotes more intergenerational and livable communities by reducing evictions and displacements, and as a result, more Philadelphians of all ages will be able to remain in their homes and communities, and that's a priority for AARP.
This gives community activists working with community leaders an opportunity to do work that would ordinarily go on for 4 or 5 years before they could get some of this done.
We don't give the grantees a lot of time to put this together, and that's intentional so that the community can really come together, coalesce around a project, and get it done.
The mats are portable, non-slip, roll-up beach mats and will serve our needs for years to come. None of this would have been possible without AARP's help.
Golden Age Park is a new park that the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust built from scratch. We were able to identify a property that was in foreclosure, purchase it, and then fundraise through a combination of public grants and private foundation support. The AARP Community Challenge Grant was a really important grant for this project. It ultimately helped to fund a number of the amenities in the park.
We were lucky to receive the grant from AARP to bring the instruments to Avoca to unite all ages.
The small investment of money is going to reap tremendous rewards for the community for years to come.
Thank you so much. I'd love for our next guest to join us, who is Michael Watson, who is a senior advisor for AARP Livable Communities. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Before we get started on the actual challenge grant, Mike, would you mind sharing what AARP Livable's communities are, as in what is the initiative? I think a lot of our viewers, this may be the first time they've heard of that.
Yeah, definitely. So AARP is working in communities across the country, including many in Wisconsin. And this work happens with AARP teams on the ground, driven by AARP staff and volunteers from communities and from state offices across the country. And essentially what we want to do is AARP wants to be there to work with community organization, work with local government, work with other partners to create communities that are great places for all ages. You kind of heard in the video just now, we believe, and as do others, that if you create a community that's a great place for an older adult, it's going to be great for everybody, kids, grandkids, everyone in between. So that's kind of our philosophy and the way we do it. One of the ways we support communities to do that is through this AARP Community Challenge Grant Program.
And the video, I think, did a really great job of kind of framing out the grant, but could you talk a little bit more about like the history and maybe how this came about, the AARP Community Challenge Grant?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is like I referenced before, it's something that's kind of grew out of state offices. So the Community Challenge is our quick action livable communities grant program. I think you heard in the video, we kind of designed this intentionally quick. What we wanted to do is kind of find a way to jumpstart progress on projects that maybe were there stalled or they just needed that little boost to kind of get them going. And we felt like we could help play a role by providing an infusion of funds and support. And again, like everything great at AARP, this is actually something that came from state offices and came from communities. So a couple state offices were actually working on livable communities work, and with partners decided that what they wanted to do was kind of provide some micro grant programs, very similar to the effort that AARP Wisconsin is doing with their Small Dollars Big Impact program. And after seeing the results of that kind of at the national level, what we did is we worked with our state offices and helped take this really great state and local program and scale it nationwide. Again, and the intention there is to kind of provide a nationwide impact and a sense of scale, and help kind of provide that infusion of funding and jumpstart progress. So that's kind of the backstory. Do you want me to go in a little bit around kind of the scale and everything? So,
yes, please.
Yeah, so that was kind of flashing back in time to 2017 when we started this first program. And since then, as kind of a pilot, but since then we've been able to fund, as you saw in the video, $6.1 million to 560 different organizations across 437 communities. And in Wisconsin, that's kind of added up to about 15 projects totaling over $140,000 that's been invested in the state. And that's a story that's replicated across the country. So that's kind of the big picture. The average grant, these aren't huge grants, but there's enough money there to kind of get things started. So the average grant is around $10,000, but importantly, just over 2/3 are actually under $11,000. So there's so many great projects that we can reference that are kind of in the $500, $700, $800 range. Some of the more kind of important and impactful ones. The other thing I'll highlight there is that this isn't just a program that's available to large urban centers or major metropolitan communities. This is a program that's available to all communities. Roughly 40% of past grantees have been from rural areas, roughly 40% have been from urban areas, and roughly 20% have been from suburban communities. So again, reflective of the country, and also providing kind of a focused support for more rural, less populated communities. And on that point too, there is about 60% of the grants have gone to local organizations as well. So it's not just something that big local governments can apply for. It's a more broader support for folks in the community.
And Mike, with the video, which I think is a great video, they kind of showed some projects. Can you talk about some of the past projects, just in case our viewers right now are thinking about, what could be a good idea of something that they could apply for?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you kind of saw some really, really standout examples, and we're going to hear from another one in a little bit. But in short, what we're trying to fund are projects in kind of a set of categories that are really focused on improving the built and social environment of a community. So think about the category of public spaces, where we funded ways to kind of activate, provide lighting and art to an alleyway. We funded several of those across the country, including in Wisconsin. Music park installations, putting in benches, and kind of finding ways to activate public spaces and improve them so that there's places for people to sit and enjoy life in the community. And on transportation, adding seating to public transit stations and making places more accessible so folks can actually access public transportation. And also programming to engage older adults on how to use new types of mobility like e-bikes and bike share, and something that we've really seen kind of expand throughout the pandemic. And on the pandemic point, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but we were able to last year kind of fund roughly 25 projects that were focused on coronavirus response and recovery. And of those, there's a really interesting, great subset of communities that were working to activate their streets and kind of hold open streets programs so folks could be socially distant, but still walk around their community and kind of engage in that public life. The last thing I'll highlight are some other examples around housing. Housing is an issue that many communities across the country are facing, and we've seen grantees able to use the funds to try to move new solutions forward in their community, whether that be actually building a tiny home or an accessory dwelling unit, so that folks kind of have a sense of what that looks like and how it can benefit them, or doing programming to kind of build support and explain to people what they are and how they could put that into their life. And on these types of projects, I think we've seen a lot of great impact too. You saw some of the statistics in the video, but 81% of grantees have kind of demonstrated that the projects have helped them advance policy change, and 45% have also demonstrated that it helps them kind of leverage or attract additional funding. So what we're trying to do is these kind of sometimes small, sometimes big projects that are the piece of the bigger puzzle, and what makes a community great.
And Mike, I know you talked a little bit about some of the example of the projects when it comes to like transportation and walkability. And I know there's 2 new categories this year that are incorporated into the challenge grant. Could you touch on those?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are 2 new categories for our challenge grant program this year. The first is kind of a expansion of last year. So as the pandemic hit last year, while we were kind of in the middle of accepting applications, we did a very quick pivot to kind of encourage applications that respond to the coronavirus pandemic. This year, we've enhanced that to kind of, again, continue to support communities' response, but also we're kind of all keeping fingers crossed for a speedier vaccine distribution process. And we're hoping that as we kind of later in the year, we're going to be looking kind of on the tail end of the pandemic and thinking about what our communities will look like moving forward, and thinking about recovery from the pandemic. So this year, we're again funding projects that are focused on improving the built environment of a community to help them recover and kind of build a community that's great beyond the coronavirus. And the other expansion that we've done in the program this year is to really kind of increase our emphasis on inclusive solutions that reach diverse voices and communities. We want to, this has been a part of the program for years, but really kind of in response to important social movements that we're seeing across the country, are really increasing our emphasis on it this year, and hope to see a lot of projects that kind of intentionally focus on being inclusive and engaging diverse voices.
And Mike, if our viewers are looking for more information, where could they go to? And then if you could also mention when the application is due for this year's funding.
Yeah, so you can actually look on the screen and there's a link right there, but they can go to aarp.org/community challenge and you'll see all of the information, all of the rules, all the regulations, more great videos and ideas for you to think about as you're applying. And there's a pretty standing out link to the application there as well. And the application is currently open until April 14th. So the window will close at 8 p.m. Eastern time on April 14th. And like me, I'm sure many of others are going to kind of think about it and put it in at the last minute. But just know that that window does close at 8 p.m. on the 14th. And if you do have any questions, there's FAQs on the website, and there's also, you can email AARP Wisconsin, or there's an email address on the website where we'll kind of get back to you and try to answer as many questions as we can.
And besides the information about the Community Challenge Grant, I know there's also information about livable communities. There's a plethora of information. There's a book that you can download on pop-ups and placemaking. So even if you're on the website to apply for the Challenge Grant, please just take 10 minutes to poke around. There's so much information that that you could use for creative ways for your community. So Mike, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today, and I definitely encourage all of our viewers, or if you're watching this as a replay, if you know of an organization or maybe you're thinking of a project that would be really great for your community, to definitely consider applying for the Community Challenge Grant this year.
Thanks, Amber. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Mike. Absolutely. So now that we've talked to Mike and he framed out the great initiative and the grant, we are now going to hear from one of our grantee winners from 2019. And I'm happy to bring on Mary Jean Green, who is the chair of SAGE, S-A-G-E, which is Successful Aging in Greendale for Everyone, which Mary Jean is located in the village of Greendale, which is in the suburb of Milwaukee. So thank you so much, Mary Jean, for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. So before we talk about your project, can you just tell us a little bit about the village of Greendale?
Sure. Greendale's a really great community. It was built really in the 1930s, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt designed it in terms of the New Deal. And one of the things they did at that point was it was a planned community, so there are a lot of walking paths and hiking paths, and all of these paths really converged into the downtown. And today there are a lot of nice restaurants and some lovely shops that people can stop in. It's a rather small community. There's about 14,000 people that live here. And one of the things we've learned from some of our data collection is that about 23% of the population here are older adults, as compared to 16% in Milwaukee and in the state of Wisconsin. So it's definitely a place where people want to age in place and stay in Greendale.
Absolutely. And then also, Mary Jean, can you tell us a little bit about how this project idea came about? And I know as you're talking, we're going to be kind of putting up some pictures to kind of give people a visual, but if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Back in spring of 2018, a Girl Scout troop number 8035 came to the Greendale Health Department, and they were working on a badge and they wanted to do something to contribute back to the village of Greendale. And so some of the staff at the health department, Sean Johnson, who's a nursing supervisor, met with some of the Girl Scouts, and they talked about a lot of different things, but really one of the things they talked about were these walking paths that I had mentioned, and that people really like to use those, but it had been a long time since they'd really been given a lot of attention. They were there, but didn't get a lot of, tender loving care, I guess. And so what they decided to do, in fact, at that point, the AARP walking audit was available. So they put that together, and then they had a community event in June of that year. Actually, it was June of 2019. And at that point, they had a lot of community members who came together and it was really organized with SAGE and the Greendale Health Department and the Girl Scout troop. And they walked through all of the walking paths in Greendale. And with the audit, we're able to really take a look at where were there, areas for improvement, maybe ruts. There certainly were no benches for anybody at that point. So that's really kind of how it got started. And this is a picture of, we had a celebration at the end once we had everything pulled together and the benches were in place. And this was our community celebration. We had a ribbon cutting ceremony and all of our community partners were there. Amber, you're there, somebody else from AARP, and then the Girl Scouts. And the Girl Scouts were really such great partners because they really took this and ran with it.
And I should mention that the Village of Greendale is one of our age-friendly network or livable communities. So the walk audit that you were referencing to is one of the pieces that you guys focus on when you're doing your action plan. But I love the different partners that were at the table, but also the Girl Scouts and it kind of being that intergenerational feel. What are your thoughts on that?
It was really, really fun to work with the Girl Scouts, and they did a lot of the work because they, as part of their badge, they pulled all the data together, and then they put together a PowerPoint presentation and they brought it to the Board of Health in Greendale and presented. And it was really just touching because I don't know if they had done a PowerPoint before and they were doing it. And the Board of Health, it's a lot of community members, but for them, I think it was the first time they ever had this leadership opportunity. So they did a great job and really worked really hard. They did a lot of the work in terms of identifying where to get benches, what they needed to be made of. One of the issues we found when they did the walking audit was that there weren't any benches for one thing, and there really weren't any signposts that gave people directions. And because they really wind throughout the whole village, you needed to have a sense of direction because you could easily get lost. So they did a lot of that work. They were really wonderful, and it was fun when we had our celebration because they were just so proud of themselves, and rightfully so.
And I have personally walked these paths because I'm very close to Greendale, and the paths themselves are very long, and the benches. And this was a grandfather and his grandson, because if you walk the paths as how they should be, there is nowhere to rest. Like you would just have to sit in the grass. So I do find that the benches are so great, not just for people walking the paths, but an opportunity to sit and just sit within the beauty. And those pictures, I may add, also were taken pre-COVID because that was in 2019. So just in case anybody's like, why wasn't anybody wearing a mask? That was in 2019.
Yes, it was.
Mary Jean, what has the impact been that you have seen with, the partnership, of course, with AARP and receiving the grant, but also just the community for the benches?
There's been just really a lot of great feedback from the community. It involved, in addition to the Girl Scouts, we also had, once the Girl Scouts put together this PowerPoint and their presentation, which included mapping, all the walking paths and what their intentions were. They provided recommendations, and it got approved by the board. But there really was no funding for this. So certainly without our community challenge grant funding, we wouldn't have been able to really move forward. So that really was important for Greendale to have that support. It also included the Women's Club from Greendale. And because the brochures the Girl Scouts identified were out of date and really had been a long, long time, and the Girl Scouts helped pull together the graphics for that and the design and everything. But again, we didn't have funding for printing, so that also was helped. I can't remember exactly how much we received from the Women's Club, but it was enough to help us with printing and hiring a graphics person. So that was pretty awesome. Trying to think what other partners we had. Certainly with our SAGE committee, we have lots of different community partners. Love Thy Neighbor is certainly a partner. Wisconsin AARP is a partner. And I think what really has been kind of exciting is that, and I don't really have any data to support this, but there are more and more people that are out walking in our community. And especially with the pandemic, I know I've been on the paths, and there's so many more people walking. So the fact that there are now benches, the Girl Scouts identified some that where you could, had arms so you could push yourself up, which was really, really great. There's signage. In fact, the funny thing is that the Girl Scouts actually put in these signposts. So we saw them one day at the health department with some big stake thing so they really they did the PowerPoints, and they got their hands dirty and helped put the stakes in place. And I think it just brings, again, like you were talking earlier, it certainly helps seniors to have benches there, but also young moms and dads with kids, and the kids get tired, and it's nice for them to have a place where they can sit down and rest for a little bit. There's a middle school that's close to the benches, and for them also, I mean, there's a lot of those kids that are having the opportunity, and now some of the where there were some ruts, those have been smoothed out. Our Greendale Public Works Department was also involved, so it really was a great community opportunity to really work together, and something that benefits really everyone in the community.
Absolutely. And it's definitely an addition to already such a beautiful area that you can walk in. So Mary Jean, I want to thank you so much. It's always good to see you, and I appreciate your feedback and input on the Village of Greendale. So thank you so much.
Sure. Absolutely.
Thank you. So we actually have one question from our audience member, and I'm assuming this is more for Mike. So Mike, are there certain provisions, inclusions in these project proposals that might help improve their chances of being selected? In other words, which types of community improvements most stand out to the judges?
Thanks for that question, Jim. It's a really great one. And I think the way I would answer it is, it's not like we're looking to fund a certain type of built environment thing, right? I think the community challenge is not about just funding benches, just funding seating at public transit stops. The way that applicants are scored and judged, and kind of the important things that we're looking for, are things like community engagement, things like identifying the need, and where this fits kind of in the broader context of how the community is working to become more livable, right? So how have groups of all ages been engaged in the process? Where does this fit? And how will this help kind of jumpstart that effort to kind of keep it moving forward? There's more information about kind of more examples of past projects on the Community Challenge website. And also there's a little more detailed information around the kind of scoring criteria and how things are weighted, and the kind of adverse impact, execution, and innovation. But that's kind of the broad way I'd answer it, is kind of the where does it fit within what the community is trying to achieve overall? How does it do community engagement? How are diverse voices included, and other things like that?
Great. Thank you so much for the clarification. Mary Jean and Mike, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. I know our viewers hopefully will share this video, tag their friends or family or favorite organization to really start getting the ball rolling on how we can try to infuse more money, especially in the state of Wisconsin. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for all your support too, Amber.
Thank you.
That.
Absolutely, Mary Jean. Thank you so much. For next week's show, we will be joined by our advocacy team, and they will be talking all about the budget. So the proposed budget for the state of Wisconsin and the impact that it has on the 50 plus Wisconsinites. So that is next Thursday at noon. You can join us back here on Facebook.com or YouTube. Also, please remember the small dollar big impact grants. This will be our third round funding. If you recall, we have these monthly. The next application deadline is March 17th. These are grants up to $1,000. So when you think about the challenge grant, this is similar concept, but on a smaller dollar. And of course, our producer has shared with us his favorite quote, which is do a radical thing on a non-radical scale. So definitely check that out if you're interested in learning more about small dollar, big impact grants. Lastly, of course, we always like to talk about some upcoming virtual events. So March 5th, which is tomorrow, identity theft. Also later in the afternoon is the one-day university lecture series, which is all about the fascinating lives of America's first ladies. Remember, this is Women's History Month. And then March 16th, AARP Lacrosse Disrupt Aging Book Club. You can find all information at the website below, or you can register at the 1-877 number below. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you have additional questions, you could post them below. We will answer them after the show, but please make sure that you tag your friend or family or share this video on your facebook.com or YouTube page. Otherwise, we will see you next Thursday. Take care and be safe.